All right. Hello and good evening. Welcome to our second Lions Lecture, which has also been a rescheduled Lions Lecture thanks to the weather. I promise I'm not bad luck, and that is just luck of the draw there. So I want to first thank our participants and our speakers tonight for being flexible in rescheduling, as well as Elvis and facilities and our AV team and everybody here who hopped on to reschedule this quickly so that we could still have this wonderful event tonight. The Lions Lecture is a joint venture by the Graduate School and First Year Track with the College of Innovation and Design. And we hope that over this next hour you brought some entertainment as our distinguished individuals take the stage to share their interests, passions, and their projects. Tonight we have Dr. Emily Newman and Dr. Kent Montgomery joining us. Each will speak for 20 minutes, and then we will open the floor for any questions after each speaker for about 5 minutes. Please feel free to enjoy the bar in the back, and Sodexo is supplying our wonderful bartender as always, and they accept card only tonight. I would now like to invite Dr. Schroeder to the microphone to introduce our first speaker.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to introduce first our first speaker, Emily L. Newman. She is an associate professor here at A&M Commerce in the Department of Liberal Studies, where she teaches undergrad classes in a wide variety of subjects, including contemporary art, modern art, history of photography, women in art, fashion, gender studies, and research, among others. She attended Carleton College, pursuing an undergraduate degree with a double major in art history and studio art, and afterward, she received an MA in art history at the Pennsylvania State University. Lastly, she completed her PhD at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. She has worked at A&M Commerce for over 12 years. Her main body of research and first book project has concerned female body image and contemporary art. In particular, looking at the way that artists have addressed issues of women's body size by exploring dieting, obesity, eating disorders, cutting, self-harm, etc. Her upcoming book focuses on intersections in fashion, art, politics, protest, focusing particularly on the strategy of feminist women. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Newman to the stage with her talk, "The Future is Female, Protesting in Sweats."
There we go. Okay. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about my project. And I want to start by kind of getting at fashion a little bit before I jump in, because I think some people don't think of fashion as like a subject you study or something you investigate long term, when in fact it's actually really important, right? Our identity is shared via fashion. Before we meet someone, before we speak, if you're walking somewhere, you notice people. You see what they're wearing, right? You make quick judgments sometimes based on that, right? And even if it's something as simple as like your pajamas, right? Someone bought those pajamas. Did you? Did your mom? Did your daughter, right? Those pajamas were made and bought somewhere. They cost a certain amount of money, so there's lots of options there. So I want you to get in this mindset of thinking about these are all choices that we make, right? So of course I'm giving a talk on fashion, and like everything I have on was carefully chosen, right? Today I'm wearing one of my favorite shirts, my Get in Good Trouble shirt, which is John Lewis's famous saying, get in good trouble, get in necessary trouble. Thought it was particularly appropriate since yesterday they celebrated the 58th anniversary of Bloody Sunday in Selma. And Biden spoke about the Voting Rights Act, which of course is what John Lewis's, one of his main goals was, still not passed, so super relevant today. We're working on revising that. I chose this pin, which is the cover of like a jail, the front of a jail, which I'm like, well, that kind of relates because John Lewis, of course, went to jail. But also it's a very specific pin that's modeled off the pin that suffragettes, the American suffragists were given if they'd been in prison and survived a hunger strike, right? And now they sell new versions of these at the Smithsonian if you're interested, right? I wore my bracelet today because we like to wear pretty things. Like, it doesn't all have to have a meaning. But to me, I got this in Greece, and it was made with real daisies that they placed in the silver and let the daisies dry out and fall out and molded them after the flowers, right? So everything then you do is a choice. How conscious of you are, can be different, but all of that is a choice. So when we look at this drawing here, I had Corinna Richards, who is a great alum of our art program, make this for me for my book. To include all the symbols and things I address in the book chapter. So she's holding Handmaid's Tale. We talk about the red dresses, the power of suits, the pussy hat, all these different things figure into my book as signs of feminism and politics and protest. And so that's kind of the idea of where this is starting. I put the remote down somewhere and lost it. I'm sorry, I'm the worst. I think I said it over here. I had my mask on. Is it on the table? Oh my goodness. Oh, here it is. Sorry, I'm the worst, like I said. Okay, but you can look at these pretty pictures now, so it's worth it. So I'm focusing on t-shirts today because they're a staple of all of our wardrobes to some extent. They became really popular in the mid-1800s thanks to our Navy men. Who like to wear them. They eventually got commissioned shirts that they could wear. They were easy. They're a shape of a T. That's one reason they say they were named t-shirts. But the other reason is that they were unloading tea and supplies. And so there's some people that named them that way. But these were how t-shirts got popular, and they were very much coded as Navy. Very masculine undershirts is how they really first got popular. It's really not to the 50s till we get our hunky men wearing our t-shirts and changing the game. And I brought in James Dean and Marlon Brando because these are the two guys that really started the popularity of t-shirts. They're, the rebel with a good heart kind of mentality. Right? The bad boys that we like, but we can change them. So I tried to think of a contemporary equivalent. It's actually quite hard. I think Colin Farrell has that bad boy edge, though, that might work today. And you'll still see very famous fashion shoots of people in white t-shirts and jeans. That is kind of the classic look. It's not until the 60s that t-shirts became used for actually saying something. And of course it was started with rock bands primarily. Silk screen techniques basically improved, the ink quality improved, so they were able to just make them better in the 60s and became popular. And this one is kind of legendary in the feminist world and feminist circles, and it's what I based my title on, The Future is Female. This shirt has kind of a storied history. It's unexpected in many ways. It was never intended to blow up and become famous. You can see from the description there, it was originally, this picture was taken from a slideshow in a self-published lesbian magazine in New York. So we're talking really small, limited audience here, but this picture has persisted. Not many people know that there is actually a back to the shirt. It gets kind of forgotten. And this because the shirt was actually made for Labrys Books and to sell their products and their goods. So, just like the Strand or any other popular bookstore, that was the intention of the shirt. The bookstore didn't last terribly much longer after this, but the shirt kind of persisted. There was something iconic about this image, that it represented a lot of feminism in the 70s, which, at the time was very, very white and very privileged and very kind of intentionally pushing women forward, right? And so this shirt kind of embodied that at the time. And if we zoom forward, right, into the 2000s, even maybe the 90s, the feminism became kind of a bad word, right? We stopped saying it, like it was used derogatorily a lot of times. And so it kind of took like Beyonce and others coming around to kind of change the game again. And I would argue that this shirt actually helped do that. So this is a post by an Instagram, Her Story, which basically posted pictures about historical females and events and feminist figures. It was run by Rebecca Burks, and she just liked the picture, posted it, got a lot of responses. And so she was like, well, I'm gonna make the shirt again. And I'm gonna give the money to charity. So she did like 24 shirts. They sold out super quick. I'm gonna make a new run. They sold out super quick. Celebrities started getting their hands on them, and also faked versions, and wearing them in their Instagrams, which is of course how that proliferates. And so these shirts became kind of in demand. So she eventually starts her own store called Otherwild, where you can see you have a variety of options for the shirt now. She did contact Alex Dobin and Lisa Cowan for permission. The origin of the shirt is a little iffy, but she did do her due diligence in trying to make sure credit was given, and continues to donate a percentage of the funds to Planned Parenthood and other feminist organizations. You will see knockoffs of this shirt, plenty of places that don't have the correct attributions and things like that. Otherwild is kind of a neat organization, and it kind of brings me to sort of the heart of what I'm thinking about when I say protesting in sweats, right? I'm not someone who's like gonna go to the Women's March. Like that's a lot of people for me, especially COVID times, like I have autoimmune issues, like I'm gonna watch it from my TV, right? So it was like, this makes me feel like I'm contributing. Is it capitalistic and engaged in all those ideas? Yeah, like I'm totally aware. But, you know, like it still gets me into the experience. But more importantly, I think what's interesting about these is that they're a conversation starter, right? I have a whole bunch of different protesty type t-shirts. And I'm always surprised when someone is like, oh, I love your shirt, right? We have a little conversation about it. And it gets people talking, right? Or I try to wear them to class to get someone to ask me about it, right? So we can make an issue of who John Lewis is, right? When I'm wearing this one. So it's a different way of engaging that I think is just as important, but can have a longer impact in a lot of ways. It doesn't go away because you keep re-wearing them. Otherwild was also created to really engage all types of people of all kind of genders and however people want to define themselves. That was really important to this store. It used to exist in New York, now it's in California and online. But they hire a lot of non-binary people, they play with their designs and engage different ideas. One of the coolest things they did was called Another Wild Fund, which was they actually did a grant for queer and trans people of color, and it results in them selling their products, putting them on the website. It's not a ton of money. I think, you know, each person who won got $1,000, but you get more name recognition out of it. I think that's the biggest thing. This is just one of the previous winners. Hyung Park designed these cool incest holders and did like a workshop through Otherwild. I believe in person, but I also think they did something online too. So another part of these stores that can be an entry point, right, through fashion. I mean, yeah, you can order them online, as I do. But if you go to the store and engage, there's different events that they do sometimes. You can meet other people who are like you. So they can become places where you get to enrich your own experiences and engagement that I think is really significant. One of the coolest things they did was they invented this gender-neutral hirsute, as they call it. Rachel Burks, who I mentioned, was the owner. Her partner felt like there wasn't a swimsuit that was appropriate for them with their androgyny. They couldn't express themselves. Suits were either like super feminine or masculine, and there was nothing kind of in the middle. So this suit is designed to be worn by anyone. There's different variations, as you can see, different pieces of it. So you can put together your own set. It's basically just about being comfortable, and then being able to go out into the world and feel like you're comfortable in your own skin. You can swim, do whatever makes you happy. This is Rachel Burks talking about this suit. These days, even when the fashion industry stakes claim on androgyny or gender queerness, brands often push shoppers to temporarily take on qualities of perceived opposite gender, like labeling items boyfriend tees or utilizing drag as a trend. Like, boyfriend jeans have never made sense to me in my entire life, right? But with her suit, we're creating products that are truly gender-free and do not cater to a heteropatriarchal gaze, which often causes people to act out prescribed performances of sexiness for an imagined cis-white male viewer. So it's really more about the experience, less about the gaze and how you feel around other people, but how you feel in your own body and in your own skin. So really pretty cool, remarkable endeavor. And then as all good things go, Other Wild is shutting down. They just sent this a couple weeks ago, right? Of course, after I confirmed my topic for this talk and everything, that the store is shutting down. I'm not sure what's going to happen to it. If you go to their website, you can get 50% off right now on everything because they're, clearing out the store. But it's like going to leave a real void. And I think Rachel Burks, who ran the store, who sent this email, really ran it. I think it kind of consumed her life. So I'm hoping she steps back and comes back into a different entry. Unfortunately, that's not as uncommon, or that's too common in what I'm trying to say, right? My Sister was another one of my very favorite sites because it was helping victims of sex trafficking. And not only in a portion of your profits went to victims, but actually they hired previous sex workers to give them real jobs and adequate support and insurance. And this one was based out of Minnesota, and it closed about 5 years ago. What they did though, which was kind of cool, is they did send their leftover products and their designs to the Outrage. So some of their designs kind of persist in interesting ways this way. And the Outrage, I would say, is the strong contender, our hope for these stores kind of staying alive. The Outrage is currently based out of Washington, D.C. And Rebecca Lee Funk is the one who started it. She's really interesting. And it's started very simply. She was mad about Donald Trump calling women nasty women. And so she made a shirt that said nasty women. And like some of us did, thought Hillary was going to win and it would be kind of a one-time thing. And then that didn't happen. And so she had found an audience of people who were angry and wanted to spend money on things to, ease their anger. Shopping therapy. I'm sure many of us have experienced it. And so it has built up over the years, got increasingly popular. These are just a couple of my favorite designs. You can see the ovaries have boxing gloves on. And where do you think you came from? And then Thoughts and Prayers, Policy and Change is one that always becomes popular around every school shooting, which is now way too much. This is their mission statement. Our goal is to make it easy, tangible, and accessible for anyone to authentically engage with our support, a progressive movement, i.e. we're connecting you with the causes you care about, right? So depending on the design, the monies are gonna go to different funds. And so this is where I got this shirt, my John Lewis shirt, after, even before he died. They had this one, but they've made a whole line to kind of honor him and support his causes. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, also a number of products about her. I'll show you in a second. But you have a Black Lives Matter shirt, different shirts for different causes, as you would expect. And I think it's important to emphasize here that she calls it a hub of activism. She sees it more as an experience, not just let's buy different kind of protest clothing. So when you go to the Outrage, you have all the fun clothing and stuff around it, but you also are surrounded by different kind of art that's engaging. They have an actual phone booth in the store where they encourage people to call their reps. And they have instructions on how to do it. They can help you find the number of your rep. They ask everyone who checks out if they're registered to vote. And if they can help them facilitate that, they will. Excuse me, these are some of the different topics. They work with certain people, sometimes certain political figures, feminist figures, geared towards different topics. You can see like Native rights, abortion rights. These are things that are all kind of topics on the site. More than the shirts, though, I really think the events they do are really powerful. So this was in honor of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's birthday. They had a Plank Like RBG event out in Washington. They made shirts like you could see they're wearing, and people from all over came and planked like RBG. When she passed away, they did a bunch of shirts that say like, may her memory be a blessing, and I'll take it from here, and have really engaged her fandom, which I think is fair that we say she has a kind of following now. They also had a really interesting COVID response because, in March 2020, it was all like, can we go to work? Like, what's the point of doing a retail shop when no one can go out, right? And put people at risk. So they came up with this idea to make postcards and to hire people who were unemployed to write the postcards. So as a purchaser, I would purchase based on how much I wanted to contribute, $3, $5, or $10, and have someone write a postcard and mail it to whoever I wanted. And depending on how much you paid for the labor of the postcard, for the writing of the postcard, those kind of things. And so they were able to hire a number of workers for a few months or so to get people by. And it was not a project where they were really trying to be profitable. It wasn't about saving their space. It was actually about getting money to people who needed it. And so it's not surprising they had hundreds of applications when they posted the job, more than they could ever help. But it was an interesting way to conceive of like, how do we help people in work in a crazy world environment? The other thing they've acknowledged is that, okay, so if we say COVID is done, what do we do with that? How do we process that? How do we process the fact that thousands of people have died? Right? Like it's almost impossible to conceive of it. So, and we all have different experiences with it. We all have different engagements and maybe know people or don't know people or know a lot of people, right? Because some families got taken out. So the idea with this is you could buy a button that they designed and then they would create a monument for someone you named. And so they have this kind of growing COVID monument in one of the walls in their spaces. So it's a reconceptualization of space. Again, it's that activist hub spirit that's really interesting. They do things like, hold a market for Black women organizations to come and buy things. And you can rent out the space. They do book readings. They bring in politicians. They hope to expand. They've traveled to kind of various women's conventions to kind of spread their notoriety and make, some shirts. But it's stumbling because of COVID, and so now trying to figure out where the best locations are for them to be. Lest you think it's all cheap, though, I wanted to show you a range of prices, and also to show you that this is not just like sweats, right? This is like haute couture if you want it to be. As shown by the Dior shirt on the far end, that's, a paltry $920. The current designer of Dior is actually a really interesting feminist, and so her bringing those ideas to the walkway was really interesting. The big one in the middle is worn by celebs. They love their like hand embroidered voter shirts. You'll see those on the red carpets. And then the ones I can afford are at the end here. Phenomenal Woman is another cool site. It's run by Mina Harris, who is the niece of Kamala Harris, and is also becoming a multi-entity. So you see these shirts in real life, you see them in practice. Hopefully we start seeing them more around campus and in Dallas, but I think we're building. We're gonna just keep seeing more of these, as these are ways to make statements. When sometimes maybe you feel like you can't speak or you don't have the words to actually speak, you can still have something to say. So that's my book. That's finally coming out in 2 months, so they say. But also, it's not just humans. This is my dog Fred modeling his ACLU shirt that I bought on the day of Women's March because I was sad and alone in my house. Wanted to do something, so. Right, it's adorable. It's even a little baseball shirt, so. There are options for everyone is what I'm saying. So have fun exploring. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? If you'll give me a second to bring the microphone to you so that we can all hear your question. I actually have one. What are keys for you when looking at a website that this is a website that is actually practicing what they're preaching and not just taking advantage?
That's a really good question. I like the idea of like a mission statement. If you check out there About Us and who's involved, looking at the credits and engaging that idea. Also, you know, like I typically only buy stuff if a percentage of the profit is going somewhere as a way to like help out and engage the things I'm interested in. So I think if you look at those two things, you can feel pretty good about what you're doing.
Thank you.
Quick question, who's your publisher?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Who's the publisher? What
Palgrave Macmillan. Springer, right? So it will be very expensive when it comes out, unfortunately. I think it's 140. Yeah, not happy about it. I think the Kindle is or the ebook edition will be 40 to 50. And then if enough sells, we get a paperback, and that's when the price goes down. So I'm really in the mode of like encouraging libraries to buy it right now, because that's where you can get the first hardback run out, and then hopefully get more from that. But if you like want to see anything, chapters or anything, you can just email me or go to my website, which is my name, EmilyLNewman.com, and I can send you something.
Is it a textbook?
It could be a textbook, but it's more just a research monograph.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Newman. I'm going to pass the microphone back over to Dr. Schroeder.
I left it right up there. Thank you. No.
All right, up next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Kent Montgomery. Dr. Montgomery is the Physics and Astronomy Department head. He moved to Texas in January of 2005 to oversee the completion of the planetarium as part of the new science building erected on campus, and he served as the planetarium director until 2018. Prior to this, he spent 10 years teaching and running the planetarium at Young Harris College, a small two-year college in northern Georgia. Kent received his bachelor's degree in mathematics and physics from Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana, where he grew up. He spent a year teaching high school in eastern Montana before attending San Diego State University, where he received a master's degree in astronomy. He then moved to Boston, where he received his doctoral degree in astronomy from Boston University. His specific research interests include interacting galaxies, low-mass stellar evolution, star clusters, both open and globular, exoplanets, archaeoastronomy, and photometric studies of asteroids. That is a mouthful. Kent's love of astronomy came from growing up under the clear Montana skies and having a grandfather who is an avid amateur astronomer. He is married with 3 kids and 3 grandkids. His other interests include backpacking, rock climbing, playing pickleball, and many building projects, including an airplane, sailboat, and tiny house. Wow, okay. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Montgomery and his presentation, My Love of Archaeoastronomy, a Study of Chaco Canyon, New Mexico.
Just click forward.
Yes.
All right. How many of you have ever heard of Chaco Canyon, New Mexico? Oh, there's a handful. How many of you have been there? 1. All right. I'm an astronomer, as you heard. I grew up loving astronomy, built my own telescope when I was 14 years old, and decided to make my love of astronomy my career. You know, you never get tired of going to work if you just make the love of what you do your work. So that's what I did. I became an astronomy professor. And then when I first came here, they weren't teaching hardly any astronomy at all. They called it a physics class, and it was one astronomy class, and nobody was taking it. They were getting like 15, 20 students. And I came to run the planetarium. I said, you know what? We can make astronomy really good here. And so since that time, we've added 8 different astronomy classes. We have an astronomy minor. We have a physics degree with an astrophysics emphasis. And we have a master's program where we have about 3 or 4 of us, it depends how you count, actual astronomers on staff. So we've gone from almost nothing to a very strong astronomy thing. But when we decided to add an astronomy minor, we needed extra classes, and I always had a love of archaeoastronomy. And I always ask my students, you know, if you can spell archaeoastronomy, that gets you a couple points. It's kind of tricky, but it's a combination of archaeology and astronomy. The idea is you look at ancient human sites, ruins, and try to figure out what astronomy they learned by how they aligned the sites, what they did to the sites. Most of them don't have written records. Now there's a few, like the Egyptians have written records, the Mayans have written records, but a lot of them is just stones or buildings. Chaco Canyon is that way. So where is Chaco Canyon? Chaco Canyon is here. Now I take students there every spring except for the last 2 years because of the pandemic, okay? And the problem is we're over here. So it's a long bus drive. It takes us 10 hours to get to Albuquerque, and then the next day it's a couple hours from there. It's really in the middle of nowhere. So you really have to be wanting to go to Chaco, because from Albuquerque you take off north and you start on a dirt road a paved road that becomes a small paved road that becomes a dirt road that becomes almost no road. And all of a sudden you pull into this place that's really nice because it's actually federal government land, and they do a good job, where the state roads are really poor to get in there. And it's technically not a national park, it's a national historical site, if you want to be technically correct, which is like that, but it's the same. It's still run by the federal government Department of Interior. And make sure I click this right. The people there, so there was this group of people, we now call them the Anasazis, which means the ancient ones. Okay? Now that term is starting to not be used as much because from the Native Americans that are still around, they said Anasazi actually means ancient ones, but it was kind of the implied evil ancient ones. But when we took it, we just said Anasazi, oh, that's ancient ones, and so they call it that, but they're trying to switch it. But I'm going to still call them the Anasazi because I've been doing it forever. It's hard to change. But you notice, here is the same thing. It's kind of hard to see here. That's the Four Corners region right there, right? Four Corners. And all these triangles are ancient sites by these Anasazi people. They populated this region from about 900 CE to about 1200, and then they abandoned them all. Or not, I shouldn't say all, but all the ones in this main area here, Chaco Canyon. This was the center of this world right here. And we think it was climate change that drove them out, but we don't really know for sure. It is really a hard place to live. In the summer, it's blazingly hot. In the winter, it's terribly cold. There's not much water. There's not much trees. We don't know why they even thrived there for 300 years. It's not a great place to actually build a civilization. But it was very populated. I'll show you why, because these are the buildings they left behind. This is the largest building. This is Pueblo Bonito. This is right in the middle of Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon is this canyon about 10 miles wide. You can see there's cliffs on either side of it. And down the middle, there's a stream that sometimes runs water when it rains, but lots of times it's just dry, depending on the climate. Buildings that they built, this one had about anywhere from 400 to 700 rooms, meaning depending on how you count them. It was 4 stories high on the outside, and it stair-stepped down to a moon shape. Very elaborate building structure. They used stones that were just there. They didn't bring them from long distances away. Just next to Pueblo Bonito, about 1,000 yards to the other direction towards the east, you get Chetl, which is another one, very large, about 400 rooms. These are the ruins of these about 1,000 years ago. This is what we still see there. Now, being an archaeoastronomer, and Casa Rinconada, which is a circular room which is called a kiva. And you'll see kivas all over. There's circular rooms all over here. The kivas were their meeting rooms, religious rooms. They were all made circular. Most of them were made below the ground because these people believed that from their culture that the people sprang up from the ground. And they would have a little indentation in the ground they called a sipapu. And that was supposedly where the people sprang up from. That created all the people that were there. Casa Rinconada is actually across the way from there, across the canyon. The difference is here it's this big circular kiva, but it's out by itself, as opposed to being part of one of these giant complexes. Not sure exactly how many people lived in these. There's guesses anywhere from in Pueblo Bonito that it was several hundred people, up to maybe even 500 people. In the whole canyon, when it was at its heyday, which was about 1100 CE, there was probably about 1,000, 1,200 people. We don't know, but we do know it was also a major trading center. In the bottom of one of these other rooms called Quincletzo, they found parrot feathers. Those parrot feathers came from Mexico. They were trading with the Toltecs at the time, and because if you go down to the ruins in Mexico, they find turquoise, which comes from the Four Corner region. This was a major trade center, and we think that's why it was here, is this was kind of a crossroads. There are also roads in the ground that we see, many miles, hundreds of miles of roads connecting all these areas here. So that's probably the reason it existed, because it wasn't here because they could plant well or get food or anything like that there, but it was probably a center for a trade route. All right, so being an archaeoastronomer, I care mostly, I shouldn't say mostly, but I like the fact that there has to be astronomy, that's why I'd be interested in it, right? And I approach it differently than archaeologists. Archaeologists go to a site and they get interested in the culture and the site, and then they say, oh, is there any astronomy? I go, oh, what's the astronomy? And then I go visit the site. So I kind of teach it from a different perspective being an astronomer. Fajada Butte, this is at the end of the canyon, there's this butte, right? A mountain, or actually hill, or whatever you want, with a flat top is a butte, right? If it's really big, they call it mesa. If it's small, they call it a butte. At the top of there, so there was a lady named Anna Sofar back in the 1970s, and she was studying petroglyphs. What are petroglyphs? They're carvings in the rocks. These Anasazi made carvings all up and down the canyon. It's really cool. You can still go see it, and I'll show you more pictures of it here. And those carvings are still there. I always tell the students, if you want to be remembered 1,000, 5,000 years from now, you make it out of stone. You make it out of anything else, it's going to go away. All the sites we look at are made out of stone because the stone still exists. Well, they would carve into these stones. They would actually peck into the stone. It means they'd take another rock and they would bash the rock and they would make these designs. And those designs are still there. She was an art student studying these designs. She saw these 3 stones right here that happened to be laying on the top right here. You can see just the edge of them right there. Those are those 3 stones. So she had climbed up to the top of this. Behind these 3 stones, she happened to go there on the summer solstice. Now for astronomers, there's 4 really important days every year. There's the summer solstice, which is around June 22nd. When the sun is highest in the sky, we have our longest days. Winter solstice around December 22nd to 21st. And the 2 equinoxes, when we have exactly equal days and nights, where there's exactly 12 hours a day, like 12 hours a night. We know that the Anasazi knew all about this. She happened to be up there around June 22nd. She went behind these rocks. Her name was Anna Sofar. And she saw behind these 3 rocks that in the rock there was a spiral pecked into it. Can you see that? There's actually a smaller spiral right over here too, but it's very hard to see on the screen. It's right here. Okay? Now, the cool thing was she just happened to be there on the right day. Because if she wasn't there on the right day, she might have missed this whole thing. But on the day she was there, she happened to go there at noon and she saw this. This is called the sun dagger. Those rocks make a perfect little beam of light that on the summer solstice pierces exactly the center of that spiral. All right? That didn't happen by chance. Not only that, she said, oh, wow, there's astronomy going on. Back in the 70s, this wasn't a big deal. There was really one archaeoastronomy site in the whole world. It was Stonehenge. But that started this whole excitement. They started looking, now we know of hundreds of sites all over the world. But she at the time said, oh, maybe there's more going on here. So she started studying this for the whole year. And what she found was, it wasn't just the solstice. It did everything else. So on the summer solstice, the sun dagger pierces this. On the winter solstice, which was the first picture I showed you, it exactly brackets the spiral. On the equinox, it pierces that small spiral that they added later to commemorate the equinoxes. That was the start of it. It was even better than that. What's more complicated than the sun, because the sun does the same thing every year, is you throw the moon in there. The moon is really tricky because the moon not only does different things every month, you have phases every month, but every year it doesn't really synchronize because the period, 29.5-day period of the moon doesn't go easily into 365 days. And so that changes. And the tilt of it processes with a 18.6-year period. You're like, oh, where's all this going, Kent? What happens is if you went out in December and you watched the full moon and you saw where it rises on the horizon, every December you would watch that full moon, it would change position for 9 years. It would stop and turn back. And then it would do this over an 18-year period. Guess what? There are exactly 9 spirals. Every year it moves by one spiral out to the extremes until it covers the whole thing. I don't think that was by chance either. Maybe, but it's kind of like, oh, why would it be exact? And it matches the moon phase as well. So very nicely done. All right, supernova petroglyphs. I told you I have petroglyphs. These are some of the petroglyphs. You can see them carved into the rock. All these were carved into the rock, pecked into the rock. And you can walk along them. There's all around the canyon they have these. Remember, in their day, it was their graffiti. We like to think, oh, this was profound. No, they were just probably kids out there bashing on the rock because they thought it looked cool, right? I mean, our graffiti nowadays, 10,000 years from now, somebody finds it, oh, hey, that's going to tell them something about society, right? Same thing here. Well, maybe. It depends on what they look at. All right, but one of the cool things is, and it's a little bit of a hike, and I take my students on this hike. It's about 4 miles to hike up the canyon around. The roads don't go there. But you see right up there, get my thing, right up here, there's a petroglyph, but this one isn't pecked in the rock. This is painted in the rock. And let me give you a closer up picture. This is it right here. You see there's a moon, a hand, and a star. The cool thing is the hand has 5 fingers. Hey, we know they had 5 fingers like we do. Hasn't changed in 1,000 years. Not that it was a surprise. You also see, if you look really close down here, I don't think you can see on this monitor, there's part of a sun thing too, like a spiral pattern as well. Kind of a bullet shape. But there was something cool that happened at the time they were there. July in 1054, there was a supernova. How do we know that? Because the Chinese and the Japanese and even the Middle East kept elaborate records. Not a single record of it in Europe, which is a cultural thing too. At the time in Europe, the church was very strong and they believed that the heavens were perfect and unchanging. So anything that they saw that was new, they ignored. Comets and all that, they kept no track of. But the good thing is the Chinese emperors all had court astronomers and they kept very elaborate records. Mostly for astrological purposes, meaning, oh, we see a comet, that means we need to go attack our neighbors or something like that, right? But in 1054, this star blew up in the constellation of Taurus the Bull. We know exactly where it is. And that star, for a few days, got so bright you could see it in the daytime if you knew where to look. Not only that, when it got its brightest, it was right next to the crescent moon. We think that's what they were painting. And there are other ones too. You see, that's a different one. There's about a dozen of these paintings, exact same paintings, throughout that whole Four Corners area. To people that were very interested in astronomy, this would have been a really cool event. A star that wasn't there before came out of nowhere, became super bright, and then over many, many days, you see, over several months, it'll fade away into nothing. And they won't be able to see it anymore. We turn the Hubble Space Telescope on it now, and we see this. This is the Crab Nebula. These is still expanding outward. In the 20 years the Hubble Space Telescope's been up there, they've actually taken pictures from when they first took it back in the early 90s to now, and they can see slight expansion. Now, space is big, so it's really tiny, but we can see the expanding clouds still. That is the remnants of what happened at that time. It's one of the cool ones because we know exactly when it happened and how long it's happened, and it also has a neat pulsar at the center of it spinning around really fast, sending out radio pulses. All right, let's go to Pueblo Bonito. See how I'm doing here? Pueblo Bonito, this is the largest building. This is also one of the oldest buildings in there. They used this for the longest amount of time. This wall right down the center is exactly a north-south wall, or what we call a meridian wall. So when the sun at noon, it sits exactly at noon, the shadow from that wall will disappear completely along the wall all simultaneously. That was done deliberately. Okay? This whole area here was lined up so that they could do cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, because that was very important to them, especially to the north. Between Pueblo Bonito and just down the road, Chetroquetl, there is a road that they built up that goes straight north over the cliff. They have stairs that go up the cliff and go straight north for about 20 miles. At the end of that, it ends in kind of a cliff that falls away. The road just ends there. At the bottom of it, they found thousands and thousands of pottery shards from pots that were brand new. The Chaco people, the Anasazi, were really into pottery. In fact, it's become a very important thing to sell and to document all the pottery they have. But they had this pilgrimage, we think, where they would go up and take brand new pots that had never been used. They would walk this 20 miles, and then they'd throw it off the cliff. And as it breaks, it was like sacrificing it to the gods because they had never used it. The same idea of taking your unblemished sheep or something, right? They would just do it with pottery. This is what it looks like if you go there, and that's one of the reasons I love to take students here. This is one of the few places where they let you walk around inside. You actually can climb through the rooms at the base of it. Most places you see it, oh, it's over there, but that's all you can see. You can walk through it and see it. This just shows a little bit of their structure. The walls on the base are really wide because it had to hold up 4 stories, so they're about 3 to 4 feet wide. These are the doors. The doors are not full size. In fact, I'll show you. This is me standing by one of the doors. So when you go through there, you have to crawl through. Yes, people were smaller then than now, but not that small. We think it was done for several reasons. It's easier to heat and cool and maintain if you have a smaller door. It's also more protection. If somebody's attacking you, it's easier to block them out of a smaller door. That's one of the reasons that they had the circle shape too, is the backside there was pretty much no entrance, so you only had them coming in from one side. It was a protection kind of thing. These are where the multiple stories, they would bring these trees. They had to bring the trees from about 40 to 60 miles away. There aren't any trees around there, not in the number they needed. In fact, they estimate they brought about 200,000 trees to this canyon over the 300 years they were building it there. That's how we know exactly when they were there, because you can date these tree rings and you can match them up exactly. There's a whole science of that. I think it's dendrochronology, where they can match all that up. Now, Casa Rinconada, this is the great kiva across the way. This is very large. It can seat about 100 people around the outside. It's lined up exactly north-south, because north and south were very important to them. The people that were performing, this was like a performance, and they would do the performances at the solstice, would come in from the north, and I'll show you why, and the people that were sitting there would come in from the south and sit around the outside. Now, astronomically, this is very interesting because, here's a drawing of it. Around the walls, there are 30 of these niches, we call them, in the walls. That's equal to the lunar cycle, 29 and a half days. Also, they have one window, this one window right here. On the summer solstice sunrise, the light comes through that window and hits one special niche they made right there to signal when the solstice occurred. Inside, you can see these niches now. They're kind of like things you would carve in your wall. They don't go through. It's not a window because it's below ground. But you would I think they would put special things. I don't know exactly. They built a tunnel here. This is a theatrical effect because remember they say that people came from the ground? So the performers would sneak in this tunnel, and all the people would be sitting there in the dark, and then they would come up from the floor in the middle of the ground. It was like a trap door you would have on a stage. But so, very strong astronomical alignments in all of their kivas. Now I'm running out of time, so I just want to show you a few pictures of the groups that we took there. These are some of the students. This was climbing. We can climb the cliffs to climb up on top, which was very fun. These are some of the students looking at petroglyphs. You're not supposed to touch it. I think I just yelled at them after that. These are students climbing in and out. We had groups that were started out small, and then they got really big. You'll see here in 2018, we had 40 and almost the same in 2019, and then it ran out of steam with the pandemic. But I'm out of time, so I don't want to keep going. So thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, Dr. Angel.
Hello. When were these settlements at their height of activity and people living there? What time frame were we looking at?
From about 900 to 1200 CE, or AD. CE is the proper term now, but yeah. So about 1,000 years ago.
Okay. So, well, is it possible in that 1,000 years that the climate and the environment has changed quite dramatically?
It has changed some, yes. In fact, that's what we think. We think it was nicer at first, so they could survive better. And then about 1200, the climatologists realized there was a massive drought that came through that whole Southwest, and that probably is what drove them away. Many of them moved up to Mesa Verde, which is we go visit there too in Colorado, the cliff-dwelling people. So they were probably descendants of this because they started about 1100 and went to about 1400. And so a lot of these probably spread out because they could still raise crops there. It was too harsh here.
Yeah.
And not only did they leave, but they bricked it up. Wouldn't you just abandon a place like this? They bricked up the doors. There's a theory by the Navajo and the people that are still there that this place became evil and they were trying to trap the evil inside.
Oh.
We have no evidence, obviously. We have not found evil. We haven't looked for evil, but.
There seems to be a draw for people to, need to know their place in time, like the calendar. That's all part of trying to place where you are in the world, or place where events happen, or.
Right, and the great thing about this is one of the perfect places for astronomy, because it is clear like 300 out of the 365 nights a year, and there's no lights, no nothing, and you're really high. This is at about 5,000 some feet when you're there.
Oh yes, yeah.
So it really wears out our students when we go hiking too, and they can't breathe. But it's an ideal place for astronomy.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And so, which is probably why the people were so into astronomy as well. They're all into the cyclical nature of it.
Any other questions? Coming.
Hi, so I am curious, in the performance space, is there any, evidence that those, I'm going to use the wrong term here, forgive me, but the notches that are cut out, is there any evidence that they had like flames in them? Were they used for lighting the performances, do you think?
We have no idea, but we do know what the Hopi Indians did. In the 1800s, there were people that came out and actually started documenting, and they were still doing these solstice celebrations. And they documented those solstice celebrations. And no, they didn't have anything in the niches, but in here, these are fire pits.
Yeah.
So they would have small fire pits going in those. These circles here had 4 actual beams holding up that were significant because they matched the cardinal points. And they would have been marked in that way, and the whole thing would have been completely covered. This was another one too, is not only did they just abandon this, they tore down the roof and they burned it, because we see the leftovers from that 1,000 years ago. They didn't want to just leave it for somebody else. They wanted to destroy it before they left.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right.
Oh, right over here. Right over here.
Sorry, you're right behind me.
Quick question: If I wanted to take a trip there, how far away do you have to stay to
Yeah, there's actually a campground there. But if you want a decent-sized settlement, you have to either be down towards Albuquerque, a place called Bernalillo, which is about 2 hours away, or you go further up to Farmington, which is about an hour and a half away. So when we drive, we stay in Bernalillo, then we go to it, then we actually go stay in Farmington the next night and drive up to Mesa Verde, which is only about an hour away from that. So I take the students to 2 national parks over the weekend. I mean, we're already there. We might as well do more than one. So, yeah. It's a great place. If you ever get out there, take the trip. It's worth it to drive down there. Even though it's way off the beaten path and you're like, where am I going? It's worth it for sure.
Any trip planned this year?
Yes, we're going this year. I hope so. Anyway, we got about 20 students signed up, and we got the reservations made. So as long as our problem is all the funding's going up, and so getting buses and stuff is getting harder and harder to do. You know how that goes. It's just inflation. But we're still going this year. Yes.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Montgomery. If everybody would join me in saying thank you to both of our speakers today. This concludes our second Lions Lecture event of the spring semester. We have one more coming up on April 6th, if you want to mark your calendars for that. I also want to give a thank you to our bartender and our AV team again. If y'all will join me in saying thank you to them. Make sure that you follow the graduate school and first-year track programs on social media so you can see flyers for our upcoming Lions lectures. And don't forget your commemorative class at as you exit. Thank you all very much. Have a great evening.